Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into what is honestly one of the most fascinating and maybe a little bit unsettling medical mysteries of our modern age. You know that feeling when you walk down a brightly lit supermarket aisle and you're just completely overwhelmed by the sheer wall of packaged choices? Well, you are definitely not alone. But what if those endless rows of snacks and boxed meals are actually part of a highly engineered trap? Today, we're going to unpack the science behind how these ultra-processed foods interact with our biology. We'll look at some incredibly striking research showing how these foods might literally be hijacking our natural appetite. It's a really wild intersection of food science, human biology, and the environment we all navigate every day. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's dive into this, because the data here tells a really staggering story. If we look at the National Health and Nutrition Examination Survey, the prevalence of adult obesity in the U.S. was hovering around 13% in the early 1960s. But if we fast forward to the 2021 to 2023 data, that number has absolutely skyrocketed to over 40%. I mean, in just 6 decades, obesity rates have more than tripled. This isn't just some slow, gradual biological shift. This is a massive, rapid acceleration. And it's left researchers asking one very obvious, but absolutely crucial question.
Because think about it, human evolution just cannot explain a change this fast. Our genes are essentially the exact same as they were 60 years ago. We haven't fundamentally changed as a species. So if the hardware is the same, what changed the output? Well, the answer really lies in our food environment. Think back to grocery stores in the early 1900s, places like the original Piggly Wiggly stores. They were tiny, maybe just a few thousand square feet. Now contrast that with today. Modern supercenters are routinely pushing 100,000, even 200,000 square feet. And the real kicker here? That massive expansion hasn't been happening in the fresh produce section. It's all in the central aisles, those sections stacked floor to ceiling with packaged shelf-stable products.
To make sense of what exactly is filling those aisles, scientists developed the NOVA food classification system. Now, instead of just looking at carbs or fats, this system groups food by how much processing it actually goes through. Let's run through the lineup really quick. Group 1 is your unprocessed or minimally processed stuff. Fruits, oats, beans, the basics. Group 2 covers processed culinary ingredients pulled from nature, so your oils, sugar, salt. Group 3 mixes those first two together to make standard processed foods, like fresh bread or a block of cheese. But we need to focus heavily on Group 4, ultra-processed foods. These are industrial formulations. They're built from refined ingredients and chemical additives you would literally never find in your home kitchen. We're talking soft drinks, fast food, and yep, even a lot of those neatly packaged protein bars marketed as healthy. And the reality? These Group 4 foods are primarily engineered for convenience, maximum shelf life, intense flavor, and of course, profitability. Not exactly for your nutrition.
Because these ultra-processed foods are basically built from the ground up in a lab, food scientists can engineer them to taste ridiculously good. Researchers actually call them hyper-palatable. That means they pack these highly specific, heavily engineered combinations of fat, sugar, salt, and artificial flavorings that just light up the brain's reward system like a Christmas tree. They completely bypass our normal biological sensors. Which brings us to the massive billion-dollar question. Do these engineered products literally force us to consume more calories than we normally would?
Section 1. The Sting Operation. The NIH Metabolic Ward Study.
Now, what's really interesting about this next part is how researchers actually tested this. They basically set up a biological sting operation. Back in 2019, 20 adults lived inside an NIH lab for 4 solid weeks. Every single bite of food was monitored. They gave participants either an ultra-processed diet or a minimally processed one. Look at the setup here. On the left, you've got an ultra-processed breakfast, bagel, cream cheese, turkey bacon. On the right, minimally processed, oatmeal, banana, walnuts. But here is the genius part. The researchers meticulously matched these diets for total calories, macros, sugar, and fiber. They were nutritionally identical on paper. The only instruction given to the participants, eat as much or as little as you want.
And the results? An absolute smoking gun. When these people were on the ultra-processed diet, they spontaneously ate roughly 500 extra calories a day. Just let that sink in for a second. 500 extra calories every single day, and they had no idea they were even doing it. Nobody was forcing them to clear their plates. Their bodies simply drove them to consume way more energy when the food was highly processed, even though the lab matched the nutrients perfectly.
So as you'd expect, that daily 500-calorie surplus had some immediate consequences. In just 14 days, the type of diet drove a nearly 2-pound weight swing in totally opposite directions. On the ultra-processed side, participants gained about 0.9 kilograms or 2 pounds, but when they swapped to the minimally processed diet, they naturally ate less and they lost about 2 pounds. The takeaway here is profound.
Nobody was white-knuckling a diet, nobody was tracking macros. Their bodies naturally regulated calorie intake based purely on the processing level of the food. And a massive clue as to exactly how this heist happened, it all came down to eating speed.
Which brings us to Section 2, the modus operandi, how these foods are hijacking your hunger signals.
So the crucial point is, how do these foods bypass our built-in biological security? Well, it starts with speed. See, fullness isn't instant. The hormones and nerve signals in your gut actually need time to travel up to your brain and say, okay, we're good down here, stop eating. One of the biggest discoveries in that NIH study was that people ate the ultra-processed foods way faster. Why? Because you barely have to chew them. They're intentionally engineered to be soft, incredibly easy to swallow, and to practically melt right in your mouth. Real, whole foods actually make you work for it. You have to chew. Because ultra-processed foods go down so incredibly fast, you can easily pack away hundreds of calories before your brain ever gets the memo that your stomach is full.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens next. While you're eating at warp speed, crucial biological signals just go entirely missing. First off, hormones get suppressed. Your digestive tract naturally makes hormones that tell you to slow down. But without the physical volume and intact fiber of whole foods, that system doesn't get triggered properly. Second, we see these wild, rapid blood sugar fluctuations. Refined grains and added sugars digest so fast, they spike your blood glucose and insulin, which usually leads to you feeling hungry again way sooner. And finally, there's the starved gut microbiome. You have trillions of microbes down there that rely on dietary fiber. When they eat fiber, they produce these short-chain fatty acids, things like acetate, propionate, and butyrate, which tell your intestinal cells to release those vital I'm full hormones. Since ultra-processed foods are stripped of that intact fiber, your microbiome basically starves, and that critical communication line is just completely cut off.
Moving right along to Section 3, the fallout, the chronic disease connection.
So, what actually happens when your biological systems are hijacked like this, day in and day out? The fallout is definitely more than just a couple of extra pounds. Population studies have consistently linked the regular intake of excess calories and the resulting excess body fat from these ultra-processed diets to a pretty serious list of chronic conditions. Now, it's true that not every single person who eats these foods will automatically get sick, but the population data clearly shows an undeniable association with poorer health outcomes overall. We're talking elevated risks across the board for obesity, type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and hypertension. It's the compounding, long-term effect of living in a food environment that's constantly overriding our biological limits.
Let's move to Section 4 and see how we can fix this, reclaiming your appetite and working with your biology.
For decades, diet culture has just pointed the finger at you, blaming a lack of willpower. But this research, it shifts the focus squarely back to biology, where it belongs. You can absolutely reclaim your appetite, but you do it by working with your body, not fighting it. And the best news is, you don't have to throw out your whole pantry overnight. Gradual shifts are way more sustainable. A great simple starting point from the research is to just add one single serving of minimally processed food to each of your meals. Try to build around beans, lentils, whole grains, and veggies. Because whole foods naturally support satiety, their water content, their actual physical structure, the fiber, it all naturally forces you to slow down. It isn't about white-knuckling restriction. It's simply about giving your body the right tools so your natural hunger and fullness signals can do the exact job they evolved to do.
Once you really understand the science behind ultra-processed foods, it totally flips how you look at the modern supermarket. It's a landscape optimized for long shelf life and rapid consumption, built on processing that completely outpaces our ancient biology. So the next time you find yourself standing in the middle of those endless, brightly colored aisles, just pause for a second and ask yourself this: are you feeding your body, or are you feeding the engineering? Thanks so much for joining me for today's Explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.